veteran bullied at a gas station, until she reveals her military past and stuns the bullies. Jessica Cole, a former Marine who had served multiple tours in some of the world's most dangerous places, now lived a quieter life, far removed from the battlefield. Dressed casually in worn jeans, a faded leather jacket and sneakers, she blended into the small-town atmosphere, just another face among the regulars at the gas station. Despite her unassuming appearance, her sharp military instincts never left her. Beneath the surface, they waited, ready to be called upon. It was an overcast evening, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. Jessica was refueling her old truck at a nearly deserted gas station on the outskirts of town, enjoying the quiet. But the peaceful atmosphere began to shift. As she filled her tank, a group of local troublemakers rolled into the station, their loud, raucous laughter breaking the silence. The gang, led by a tall, burly man named Rick, immediately noticed Jessica standing alone. Rick's eyes narrowed, a smirk forming on his lips as he nudged his friends. "Look at this one," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. They exchanged leering glances, sizing her up, whispering to each other like predators hunting prey. Jessica's senses sharpened, but outwardly she remained calm, continuing with her task. The station attendant, an older man with a nervous glance, recognized the gang. They had a reputation in town. Troublemakers always looking for a fight. He ducked behind the counter, silently hoping that Jessica would leave before things escalated. Unfortunately, Rick and his group had no intention of letting her leave that easily. They sauntered toward her, their voices growing louder, drawing attention to her with mocking laughs. One of them, a younger man named Mike, sneered as he walked a step ahead of the others. "What's a pretty little thing like you doing out here all alone?" Mike's voice was laced with condescension as his eyes swept over her in a way that made Jessica's skin crawl. The other men chuckled, egging him on. Jessica ignored them, focusing on her truck, her muscles tense but her face impassive. She had dealt with men like this before, arrogant, aggressive, and all too confident in their numbers. "You deaf or something?" Mike continued, stepping closer. "Ain't safe for a woman to be out here by herself." Rick grinned as he watched Jessica remain stoic. He found it amusing. "Maybe she likes the danger," he said with a laugh, his voice booming as he stepped in front of her, blocking her path to the truck. Jessica met Rick's gaze, her eyes cold and unwavering. There was no fear there, only the calm of someone who had seen far worse than a group of local bullies. Rick's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, stepping closer, his chest puffed out in an attempt to intimidate. "You think you're tough, eh?" Rick asked, his voice low and dripping with menace. "Why don't you say something, sweetheart?" Jessica could feel the tension rising, her instincts telling her that things were about to get worse. She scanned her surroundings subtly, calculating her options. She wasn't one to look for trouble, but she wouldn't back down either. The gang grew bolder, their taunts becoming more aggressive. One of the men threw a beer can toward her feet, while another muttered a crude comment about her appearance. Rick stepped even closer, his large frame towering over her. "Don't make me ask you twice, girl. You should be nice to us," he said, his voice carrying an unspoken threat. The other men laughed again, sensing that the situation was about to boil over. But Jessica was still calm, her eyes locked on Rick's. Beneath her cool exterior, she was calculating, waiting for the right moment. She knew what they didn't. They had already lost this battle, even if they didn't realize it yet. "I suggest you back off," Jessica finally spoke, her voice low and firm, but still measured. It wasn't a plea or a request. It was a command. The laughter died down as the gang exchanged confused glances. The tension hung in the air like a storm about to break, but Jessica remained unfazed, standing her ground. Jessica's instincts told her to stay calm, to handle the situation without escalating it further. She knew that in moments like these, control was key. Taking a deep breath, She spoke in an even tone, trying to diffuse the tension. "Look, I don't want any trouble. Let me finish up and we can all go our separate ways," she said, her voice steady but firm. She started to turn toward her truck, hoping that a peaceful exit would diffuse their aggression. But the gang had other ideas. Rick, already annoyed that his attempts at intimidation weren't working, clenched his jaw. His pride stung at the fact that this woman, this quiet stranger, wasn't cowering in fear like others before her. Without warning, he grabbed her by the arm, yanking her back with a rough pull. "Hey," Rick growled, his face inches from hers. "I'm talking to you. Don't turn your back on me." Jessica froze for a split second, her muscles tense. The grip on her arm was strong, and she could feel the shift in the air around her as the other gang members closed in, forming a tight circle. The stench of beer and sweat mixed with the tension, creating a claustrophobic sensation. The walls of the gas station seemed to close in as the gang members jeered and taunted her, their voices growing louder. Mike, emboldened by Rick's move, stepped closer, his sneer widening. "Look at you, all tough and quiet. What's the matter? No one to protect you now?" The insults shifted, becoming more personal. They mocked her appearance, her quiet demeanor, and the fact that she was alone. The words hit like jabs, but Jessica's face remained composed. She had heard worse, much worse, in her years of service. To her side, a woman named Karen, one of the gang members, pulled out her phone, a twisted grin on her face as she started recording. "Come on, show us what you've got," Karen jeered, encouraging the others to escalate the situation. "This is gonna be good." The gang, now feeling invincible in their numbers, laughed and cheered as Rick tightened his grip on Jessica's arm. It wasn't just about intimidation anymore. This was about power. They wanted to break her, to see fear in her eyes. But Jessica wasn't the type to break. Her military discipline kicked in, her mind quickly assessing the situation. Her hand twitched slightly, a reflex she had developed during combat, readying her body for action. Her eyes darted around, calculating the positions of the gang members, assessing the exits, the obstacles, and the distance between her and the truck. Every detail was locked into her mind within seconds. She met Rick's gaze, her voice steady, but with a dangerous edge to it. "Let go of my arm." "Now." Rick chuckled, shaking his head as if she had said something ridiculous. "Or what?" he mocked. "What are you gonna do, huh? Call for help? I don't see anyone rushing to save you." His voice was dripping with arrogance, but behind his bravado was an unmistakable hint of unease. There was something unsettling in the way Jessica held herself. Too calm, too controlled. James looked closer into the boy's face and wondered which sister he looked after. The gang closed in tighter, their laughter and taunts becoming louder, but Jessica's focus narrowed. She could feel the heat of their stares, the press of bodies closing in, the tension building like a ticking bomb. The whole situation was teetering on the edge of violence, one wrong move away from exploding. But Jessica didn't flinch. Her heart beat steadily, her breathing even. She could feel the adrenaline starting to surge through her veins, but she refused to let it cloud her judgment. The steely look in her eyes, once hidden beneath her casual civilian appearance, now came to the surface. She wasn't just a woman at a gas station. She was a Marine, trained and tested in combat. And no amount of bullying was going to make her forget that. A smirk tugged at the corner of Rick's mouth, but it faltered when he saw the change in her expression. Jessica's eyes locked on his, and in that moment, he realized something. He had picked the wrong person to mess with. For the first time since the encounter began, the gang's laughter quieted, replaced by a palpable tension. The air was thick with the sense that something was about to happen, something they hadn't expected. Jessica wasn't scared. She was ready. Jessica could feel her patience slipping away, and it was clear to her that words weren't going to be enough to de-escalate the situation anymore. Rick, still gripping her arm, leaned in closer, his breath reeking of cheap beer and arrogance. The gang around him cackled, feeding off his bravado, unaware of the line they were about to cross. "You really don't want to do this," Jessica said. Her voice calm but firm. It wasn't a threat, just a fact. But to Rick and his crew, it sounded like the plea of someone who was out of options. The gang burst into laughter, misinterpreting her warning as a sign of fear. Rick grinned, his hand tightening around her arm. "Oh yeah? And what you gonna do about it?" Oh. In that moment, everything shifted. Without warning, Jessica moved. With a single fluid motion, she twisted her arm free from Rick's grasp, pulling it back with such precision that he staggered backward, blinking in confusion. The suddenness of her action left the gang dumbfounded, their laughter dying on their lips. Jessica stood tall now, no longer trying to blend into the background. She wasn't the quiet stranger at the gas station anymore. Her posture was different. Straight-backed, alert, and unafraid. "You think you can scare me," Jessica said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I served in the Marines for 10 years. The words hung in the air, sinking in slowly. The gang's faces, once full of cocky confidence, faltered. They exchanged uncertain glances, their bravado draining as they realized the situation wasn't what they had expected. This wasn't some helpless bystander they could push around. This was someone who had seen things, survived things far worse than their pitiful attempt at intimidation. Rick, trying to regain control of the situation, scoffed. "Big deal," he muttered, his voice betraying a hint of unease. "You think that matters here?" Jessica's gaze never wavered. "It matters more than you think," she said, stepping closer to him, her eyes narrowing as she looked him up and down. She wasn't intimidated by his size or his sneers. She had faced men twice his size in combat, and none of them had shaken her. She had learned long ago that real strength didn't need to shout. It showed itself in calm, controlled action. Rick tried to save face, but he was clearly rattled. He opened his mouth to say something else, but before he could speak, Jessica acted. With the precision of her training, she grabbed his wrist and twisted it in a quick disarming move that sent him stumbling backward, nearly losing his balance. His eyes widened in shock as he realized what had just happened, pain shooting through his arm. Jessica didn't even break a sweat. The gang stood frozen, their eyes wide in disbelief. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of traffic on the highway and the gentle clatter of Rick's feet scraping against the pavement as he tried to steady himself. The tables had turned, and now they were the ones caught off guard. Rick rubbed his arm, his tough guy act faltering as he took a step back. You're crazy," he stammered, but the fire had gone out of his words. Jessica remained steady, her voice calm but commanding. "I told you, you really didn't want to do this." The rest of the gang, once eager to follow Rick's lead, now hesitated. Mike, who had been sneering just moments ago, was nervously glancing between Jessica and Rick, unsure of what to do next. Karen, still holding her phone, lowered it slightly, no longer as eager to capture the confrontation. The bravado they had shown earlier evaporated, replaced by an uneasy silence. Jessica's presence now dominated the space. She didn't need to say anything more. The message was clear. She wasn't someone to be messed with, and they were out of their league. For the first time, Rick looked around at his gang, seeing the doubt in their eyes. He took a step back, trying to salvage whatever was left of his pride. "This isn't over," he muttered, though even he didn't seem convinced by his own words. Jessica didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her calm demeanor, her quiet strength, it had already spoken volumes. She watched as Rick and his gang slowly backed away, their swagger gone. Replaced by nervous glances and muttered words, they slunk off into the shadows, disappearing into the night. As the sound of their retreating footsteps faded, Jessica took a deep breath, letting the tension drain from her body. She had handled the situation without letting it spiral out of control, relying on the discipline and skills she had honed over a decade of service. She turned back to her truck, the gas pump still in hand, and resumed filling her tank. The station attendant, who had been watching from the safety of his booth, gave her a wide-eyed nod of respect. But Jessica didn't need acknowledgement. She had dealt with far worse than a few local bullies, and she would continue to move through life with the same quiet confidence she had always had. As she drove off into the night, leaving the gas station behind, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She hadn't asked for trouble, but when it came knocking, she knew how to answer. Rick's face flushed with rage and embarrassment. The laughter of his gang had long since faded, replaced by a stunned silence. His pride was wounded, and his ego couldn't let him back down. With a roar of frustration, he lunged at Jessica in a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. His arms swung wildly, but Jessica was ready. Years of military training kicked in like second nature. Jessica sidestepped his clumsy attack with ease, her movements fluid and precise. She didn't need brute force to overpower him, just skill and timing. As Rick stumbled past her, she swiftly grabbed his arm, using his own momentum against him. In one quick motion, she flipped him onto the ground, his body landing with a heavy thud. The air was knocked out of him, and Rick lay there, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with shock. The onlookers, including the station attendant and a few customers who had been quietly observing from a distance, couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. This small, unassuming woman had taken down a man twice her size with effortless grace. Karen, still holding her phone, slowly lowered it, her earlier smirk now replaced by disbelief. The group of bullies that had been so full of confidence minutes ago stood frozen, their bravado shattered. For a moment, everything was still. The only sound was Rick's labored breathing as he tried to recover from the blow to both his body and his pride. His gang stood around him, unsure of what to do next. Mike, the one who had been taunting Jessica earlier, took a step back, clearly not wanting to be next in line. Karen fumbled with her phone, no longer interested in recording what had quickly turned into a humiliating defeat for their leader. Jessica, calm and composed, took a deep breath. She didn't need to gloat or make a scene. The message had been delivered loud and clear. With quiet confidence, she turned and began walking back to her car, the weight of the confrontation already behind her. As she reached the driver's side door, she paused and glanced over her shoulder at the gang, who were still scrambling to gather themselves, confused and worried. She looked at them and gestured for them to follow her. "Next time," she said, her voice carrying easily across the parking lot, "pick on someone your own size." Rick, still on the ground, glared up at her, but he didn't have the strength to respond. His gang stood around him, awkwardly shifting from foot to foot, unsure of what to do next. The humiliation was palpable, and the onlookers who had once feared the gang now watched in awe of the woman who had brought them to their knees. Jessica got into her truck, started the engine, and with one last glance at the defeated bullies, drove away. The gang could do nothing but watch as she disappeared down the road, their earlier dominance reduced to nothing but a distant memory. They had thought they were invincible, that they could terrorize whoever they pleased without consequence. But tonight, they had met someone stronger, not just in physical ability, but in spirit and resolve. As Jessica's taillights faded into the distance, Rick struggled to his feet, still winded from the fight. He glanced around at his crew, hoping to salvage some dignity, but there was none to be found. The station attendant stepped out of his booth, shaking his head in disbelief. He had seen this gang torment countless people over the years, but never had he witnessed anyone stand up to them like that, let alone defeat them so effortlessly. Erin, clutching her phone, turned it off, too embarrassed to share the footage she had eagerly been recording. The gang, once so united in their arrogance, now felt fractured, their leader's defeat hanging over them like a dark cloud. As Rick limped toward his bike, his pride in tatters, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would haunt him for a long time. He had underestimated Jessica, misjudged her quiet strength, and now he was paying the price. The gang climbed onto their bikes in silence, none of them daring to speak as they sped off into the night, leaving behind a town that would never look at them the same way again. Meanwhile, as Jessica drove away, the adrenaline slowly left her system, replaced by a calm satisfaction. She hadn't asked for a confrontation, but she had handled it in the way she always did, with grace and strength. As Jessica left the gas station, she had no idea the ripple effect her actions would soon cause. Within an hour, the footage Karen had recorded made its way online. What began as a casual upload quickly spiraled into a viral sensation. The video spread like wildfire across social media platforms, shared by millions. Comments poured in from all corners of the internet as people marveled at the mysterious woman who had stood up to a gang of bullies with quiet strength and impeccable skill. Veterans in particular rallied behind Jessica, recognizing the discipline and restraint in her actions. Many shared their own stories of service and applauded her for handling the situation without escalating it unnecessarily. "That's what real training looks like," one veteran commented, while others noted the clear difference between brute force and controlled, calculated action. "Respect to the Marine who showed those punks what real strength is," read another post that gained thousands of likes. Civilians, too, were captivated by the video. Some were in awe of how someone who appeared so unassuming could dismantle a group of bullies without breaking a sweat. "Never judge a book by its cover," one user wrote. "She looked like an ordinary woman, but she's clearly anything but ordinary." Others pointed out the courage it took to stand alone in the face of such aggression, with one person commenting, "Her calmness in that moment speaks volumes. We could all learn something from her." Meanwhile, Rick and his gang were left in shambles. Their reputations, once built on intimidation and fear, crumbled overnight. They had become the laughingstock of the town and beyond. Everywhere they went, people whispered behind their backs, mocking them for being taken down by one woman. The humiliation was unbearable, especially for Rick. His tough guy persona had been shattered, and no amount of bravado could restore it. Even more damning, the station attendant, who had witnessed the entire event, was interviewed by local reporters once the video went viral. Though he had been too scared to step in at the time, he now eagerly shared his account of what had happened. "She was like a force of nature," he recalled, awe clear in his voice. "I've seen those guys terrorize people before, but she handled them without breaking a sweat. It was like watching a pro in action." He wasn't the only one to speak up. Other witnesses who had been present at the station began to come forward, confirming what the video had shown. Some even admitted that they had initially been afraid for Jessica, thinking that the gang would overpower her. But after seeing how effortlessly she handled the situation, they could only express their admiration for her bravery. The media picked up on the story, and soon news outlets were running features about the mystery Marine. Speculation ran wild as to who Jessica was, with some even suggesting she might have been a high-ranking military operative. But for Jessica, it wasn't about the attention. She hadn't sought to become a viral sensation, nor had she wanted to humiliate anyone. She had simply defended herself, relying on the skills that had been ingrained in her through years of service. As the video continued to gain traction, many began to reflect on the deeper message behind it. The narrative shifted from being about a viral altercation to a story of inner strength, resilience, and the power of calm in the face of adversity. She didn't need to shout or threaten. one viral comment read. She just stood her ground with quiet confidence, and that's what made her so powerful. Jessica's actions became a symbol of the kind of strength that often goes unnoticed, the kind that doesn't rely on appearances or aggressive posturing. It reminded people that true power doesn't come from loud displays of force, but from the ability to stay calm under pressure, to know when to act and how to act decisively. Over the next few weeks, Jessica's story inspired countless discussions online and in real life. Many saw her as a hero, not because she had fought off a group of bullies, but because she had done so with grace and dignity. She could have hurt them if she wanted to, one user pointed out, but she didn't. That's what makes her a hero. She chose restraint in order to free her family and friends from harshness. In the end, Jessica became a beacon of quiet strength for many who watched the video. She reminded the world that appearances can be deceiving, and that you never know the battles someone has fought just by looking at them. More importantly, her story served as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about how loud or aggressive you can be. It's about standing tall with calm confidence when the world expects you to fall. This story teaches us that true strength comes from within, and it's not always about physical power or aggression. Jessica's calm and composed response to the bullies at the gas station shows that courage and confidence are often the most powerful tools in confronting adversity. It also serves as a reminder never to judge or underestimate someone based on appearances, as we never know the battles they fought or the strength they carry within. In the end, Jessica's military past became a lesson in resilience, proving that dignity and composure can outshine intimidation.